Hello and welcome to Nature Tots at Home. I've been digging this soil because I want to get it ready to grow some plants for us to eat later in the year. And there's one thing that I'm always really pleased to see when I'm digging, and that is worms. Now worms are really important for soil. They do some very important jobs that keep the soil healthy and make it really good for us to grow plants. So as they tunnel through the ground, they create gaps in the soil, and this allows water to drain through so it doesn't become too wet, and it also allows air in so the plants get everything they need to grow. And then, have you ever wondered what plants eat? Well, worms eat. They eat old bits of leaf, bits of moss, things that are dead on the top of the soil, and as they eat them, they break them down into small pieces and take them into the soil, and this gives the soil all the goodness it needs to help the plants grow. Worms are also very important as a food source for lots of animals like birds and badgers. But I want this worm to help my soil, so I'm going to make sure it goes back in there to keep burrowing away. Now if you want to go looking for worms, you could either get a trowel or a spoon and have a dig in some soil carefully and see what you can find, or you could try worm charming. Find a piece of grass, it's always best if it's slightly damp, and stomp up and down on it. Pretend you're a blackbird hopping up and down on the lawn and see if you can charm any worms up to the surface. When you've got some, have a really close look at them and see if you can tell the difference between its head and its tail. But when you finish with a worm, always make sure you put them back in the soil, somewhere where they'll stay damp, because worms actually need to stay wet. Their skin is always very moist. It's not slimy, it's just wet. And that's because they breathe through their skin, so it needs to stay wet to help them breathe. So always put them back where they're going to stay nice and wet. When you've found some worms, take a really good look at them. Can you tell which end is the head and which is the tail? So usually you'll see one end is a little bit more pointed, and that's the head. That's where you'll find the mouth. And you can see that it's moving from there. Watch how the worm moves. They don't have bones, they don't have arms and legs, so how do they move along? They move by stretching out and then wriggling along behind it. Can you move like a worm? And if you look very carefully, some worms have a thicker area round about here, and this is called a saddle. And you know when you see a saddle that it's an adult worm, because this is the area that they lay their eggs from. And the saddle is always closer to the head than it is to the tail. If you look at the body, it's made into little sections, and these are called segments, and it's by stretching these segments out and then pulling them back in again that the worm manages to pull itself along and burrow through the soil.